And if you're not that person, like really hire somebody else to do it. If you've got a plant, like you got to freaking water it. And if you're not going to water your plant, don't buy it. You have no business buying a plant.
That's amen.
Susan, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
I'm so excited. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
I'm really excited too because we're going to be talking about all those things finance related that early entrepreneurs really need to know, but like almost always don't know. And I'm personally very curious because finance is not my strong suit, personally or professionally. So I feel like this is going to be really illuminating.
I hope it is.
Should we start with the entity creation, like sort of starting at the top at the beginning? This is sort of like step one, I feel like, for a lot of people who are starting a business, but I know you have some hot tips.
Yeah. I think the first thing I would say is that before you do anything, make sure you have the right advisors in place. I see so many instances where people set up entities improperly, they're owned incorrectly for the type of assets that are going to be held. They just end up doing it wrong. And generally speaking, it is very difficult to go back and could be very costly from a tax perspective to go back and redo something. So first thing before you even contemplate setting up an entity, talk to somebody about it. Get an accountant, talk to an attorney. And Google University is not necessarily your bestest friend in this situation because it's very general advice, not necessarily specific to you. So I would say that. That's usually where people are like, oh no, that's going to be expensive. Trust me when I say this, is that most of the time it's worth the $2,000 that you're going to spend to get an entity formed in the right way, with the right advice in the right situation, versus having to go back later and suffer some type of horrible consequences you didn't do it right to begin with. So, okay. All of that to be said, there's basically 4 different ways that you can be taxed as a business. Okay, so everyone's very familiar with the first one, and that is I'm a sole prop, or I've set up an LLC, and it's a single member LLC, so it's disregarded for tax purposes. A sole proprietorship and a single member LLC are both reported on your Schedule C on your Form 1040, which is awesome because it doesn't require another tax return to be prepared. And you don't have to prepare a balance sheet to go with it. It's just really the income statement, the profit and loss stuff that you got to report. So that's really cool. Single member LLCs are pretty easy to create in most states. They're easy to maintain. You don't have to keep meeting minutes. And I'm not an attorney, but they tell me that they are more preferential because they're just easier to maintain from being.
I have. That's what I have. I have a sole proprietor LLC, and I did mine through LegalZoom. It was super easy, and they just send me any notifications when I have compliance stuff that I have to do. I just had to do my annual report because it's due next month. So it's super easy. It was literally 2 minutes to fill out all the paperwork, and it's super easy to maintain as well.
Yeah, you'd be surprised the number of people who don't do that. And that's very dangerous because if you've got an entity and it's not in good standing and then someone goes to sue you, then you've lost that liability protection that you wanted. Yeah. So you really do have to, that's one thing, you just got to always make sure your entity is in good standing. So I would say that's the most common entity that's formed these days. But the crazy thing about an LLC is, and I have a feeling most people get asked this question, what kind of entity you have? And they most say LLC. And then the tax preparer will ask, well, how are you taxed? And they're like, I'm an LLC. Well, an LLC can be taxed 4 ways. It can be a disregarded entity for tax purposes. So single member LLC, Schedule C on your 1040. If it's 2 or more members, the default is a partnership. It can make an S election, or it could also make an election to be treated as a C corporation.
Yes, this I have heard of, but never seen in practice.
Yes, it can be any of those. And so a lot of times what I find is people start off as an LLC. They start making a lot of money, and that self-employment income becomes a very onerous tax burden because you both have income tax and self-employment tax, both federal income tax and self-employment tax. And that's the point at which people are like, mercy, that 0.9% goes on forever and ever on self-employment tax. And that's when people say, is there a better way? So
Yeah.
that's usually when we start the discussion on, does it make sense to become an S corporation? Is perhaps maybe a C corporation better for your future? Are you raising money? And I mean, there's just all sorts of different types of reasons you might choose to be taxed in a different way. But
But for early entrepreneurs, easiest way is like start a sole proprietor LLC, and then when you scale and grow as like your business changes, then you can reevaluate and decide which route to go for the future.
yeah, and your strategy really is if you don't need to have a separate tax filing, and maybe you're small to begin with, but then you start growing, it's really you do as much damage control as you can on reducing that income tax burden and the self-employment income as much as you can, and then
Mm,
you look to make an election typically to be a S corporation. But I would
okay,
say it's not until your like net self-employment income is 120 150K.
cool.
Before then, the math just generally doesn't work because there's a lot of other things you got to do once you become an S corporation.
Okay, cool. That's super helpful. I feel like that's such like a clear like bar.
Yeah, a lot of times people start as an S corporation. I'm like, oh, why? This is not benefiting you in any way. You know what I mean? It's just because they heard from a friend that that's the best way to set up a business. And yeah, it can benefit businesses that make a lot of money, but it's a big burden. It's onerous on that owner to have to file another tax return and pay for the preparation and run payroll for themselves. And it can be a little bit much when you're first starting out.
What do you recommend in terms of, do you have like platforms that you like that are super easy, integrated solutions that are the easiest for people to start and maintain their filings?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan for anybody who is going to run a business. They need to have a tax accountant. You got to have a tax
Mm,
advisor. You and maybe if it's super super small and maybe you just have some expenses and you're just getting started, but even then there is so much to learn. And the last thing you want to do is to not have taken advantage of all the possible deductions that were available to you and left money on the table.
totally.
And
It's like just
so
because you're small doesn't mean that you should be losing money. Well, honestly, especially because you're small, you should be saving as much money as possible. And to have someone help you with the taxes and understanding exactly where you should be and how you should be filing and where you can be saving, etc., is such like a life hack that I feel like people are always looking for ways to save money as a small business, but nobody thinks about this area as a potential option. And even though it might be expensive to have someone on staff that's sort of a tax genius, I think it'll be worthwhile in the long run.
yeah, and don't forget, if you have a business and you are paying someone to advise you on how to maximize your tax deductions, that's a deductible business expense because they're advising your business. So you mean it's sort of like a twofer, right? You save the
Yeah.
taxes and you get a tax deduction. So people often overlook that, but that can be huge depending on your tax rate.
Yeah, I mean, it's all honestly so complicated, and it's shocking to me that they don't teach you this stuff in school. Like, why there is not a high school class dedicated to taxes just blows my mind because by the time you're 18, you're a legal adult, you're supposed to be paying taxes. It's like, no, we go into it just completely blind, and then let alone if you want to start a business, how the best way to handle that and like how to keep things separate, I feel like is also tricky, especially for entrepreneurs. Like,
Yeah.
when to separate personal versus business and how that all works, like, is also a whole other can of worms.
Oh, huge. I think, though, to that point about they should teach a class on taxes, they really should. I mean, at least the basics. I mean, my dad really did me a solid when he taught me how to do my 1040. And now it was telefile back in that day where you had to pick up the phone and type in the numbers.
Oh my gosh.
If you can only imagine, this was before the internet, right? So we get to telefile our tax returns. But your taxes are your single largest expense in your lifetime.
Wow.
So why wouldn't you do everything you possibly can to reduce them? Like
Yeah.
it's worth it paying. I mean, people pay money to improve property, to maintain their cars. Why aren't you paying money to maintain your tax situation? You know,
I think it's like high barrier to entry in terms of appearance. Like, I think it comes across as this mega confusing, ultra nuanced, very complex space. And if you don't have a degree, like how are you going to just as a layperson figure that out? And I think like it's so overwhelming, especially for entrepreneurs. They're like, I have 1,000,005 things that I'm already trying to figure out. Like that is such on the bottom of their priority list that it just seems like such a miss that nobody's teaching the kids how to do this stuff.
Yeah. Agreed. And I think they're trying to do a better job. I volunteer at my daughter's high school, and
Oh,
they have
cool.
an incubator EDU program. It's sort of like a mini Shark Tank, but they go over a lot of these types of things for people who are interested in pursuing entrepreneurship. Do they get
I
into
love that.
taxes? No, but it's a becomes a little bit of a introduction to all the things to
Mm,
be thinking about. So I think in the right situations, maybe they're trying, but
yeah.
it is, you're right. There's really no place to go. And as much as, people love YouTube or God forbid TikTok, I mean, I've seen some crazy suggestions on the social media. Really, your most reliable source is a qualified professional who gets referred to
Mm.
you by someone that you know, that you like, and that you trust, that has the experience to really advise you in your particular situation.
What is the craziest thing that, or like maybe the most common misconception that you see promoted a lot on TikTok?
Oh my goodness. I think this, like, you can write off every expense, right? Just start a business and you can just write everything off. Like, no, no. I mean, you have to have a legitimate business purpose for an entity, and those have to be
Right.
legitimate business expenses, which I think is actually a great kind of segue into what is legitimate business expense, right? Like,
Yeah.
this comes up a lot. There's a lot of do's and don'ts. There are things that are just like taboo, strictly forbidden, that are in the Internal Revenue Code that are like clear. If it's a personal expense, it's not a business expense.
Mm.
It's pretty clear. But then it's like, well, then what is a business expense exactly? So it differs from business to business, because what is ordinary and necessary in your business may not be ordinary and necessary in my business. Like if you had a pet sitting business, well, you might have to buy dog food
Yeah.
or treats or something. But if I had a dental practice, me buying pet food and pet treats for my dental practice, that's not ordinary and necessary, right?
Right.
So that's the type of logic that you really have to apply. And that's what I teach my clients is like, do you need this? Is this necessary for your business? What does it do to promote your business? Does it
Mm.
increase sales? Does it reward employees? Is it benefit to them? Is it advertising, marketing? I mean, what is it doing? And if
How do
it
you
is,
actually do this? Like, what does it mean to write it off? Like, do you have to be making revenue to write something off, or is this something that you like? Is there a section on your taxes that like where it's like, what are your expenses? How does this? Because I've always heard like, oh, just write it off, but like, I
yeah.
don't understand what that means. Like, how?
Oh my gosh, that totally reminds me of that Schitt's Creek episode where,
Yes.
yes, I think everybody's probably like, oh my gosh, yes, I remember that. I just write it off. Write it off. Okay, so maybe we should just kind of back up, right? So when you start a business, there's a few steps that have to be taken. So one, you're going to form an entity. You're
Yep.
going to name that entity. You're going to set it up. Then you're going to go get what's referred to as an EIN number. That's an
Yes.
employer identification number, the IRS. And then you're going to go set up a business bank account and a business
Yes.
credit card, right? That's kind of lay
Yeah.
of the land. And then you're going to pay for everything related to your business out of those accounts. And if you earn any revenue, you're going to deposit that money into your business bank account. And
Yep.
therein, that is like the basis that you are creating is your business accounting records, right? These are the source documents that then turn into those accounting records. So once you pay for something out of one of those accounts, like credit card or your business checking account, that gets recorded into your accounting records. And if it's an expense, it's going to be a write-off, if you will, right? It will
Mm.
basically be written off against the revenue that you've earned. Is it possible to have expenses before you even earn a penny of revenue? Absolutely. It happens all the time. It's called a startup expense. You
Yeah.
got to build a website before you launch your business. Forming the entity, my goodness, you have to pay for that personally and then be reimbursed by your company once your business bank account's all set up. So,
Yeah.
I mean, oh my goodness, the number of things that go into that, right? So many things. But that's essentially what a write-off is all those ordinary and necessary expenses that you've incurred to aid in the growth of your business somehow that become a deduction against the revenue that you have earned. That's what a
Okay,
write-off is.
so let's like take my case as an example. So like, for the podcast, I have the subscription to this platform, the Riverside platform. I have to file my report, like that's another expense. Or like my podcast microphone is, a necessary expense, but I don't generate revenue technically, like I don't have ad sales or anything like that. So how, and if I'm to pay all of those things out of the business checking account, does then like when I write that in my taxes, does then the government give us that money back, or how does that work?
So anytime you have a business, you're going to want to at some point earn some type of revenue. Otherwise, it
Totally.
may be considered a hobby, right? But that
Yes.
might take a couple years for some businesses to generate profits from
Right.
their efforts. It just happens that way. Essentially, what happens on Schedule C anyway, when you have a 1040 that reports a Schedule C, which is that filing, that any type of, if you had a loss, if you will, so your expenses exceeded your income, that would
Right.
get reported as essentially as a reduction of all of your other income reported in that year, your other ordinary
Hmm.
income in that year. And so let's say you had a W-2 job too.
Yep.
If your W-2 was, let's say, $50,000 and your loss in the business was $5,000, then your income would be $45,000 that you would pay tax on.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. So now, does anybody really want to spend $5,000 to save maybe 20%, 25%, in taxes? No, we'd rather have cash. I'd rather
Right.
have my $5,000
Yeah.
than 25% deduction. But the whole point of it is that the government is essentially offering you a reward for taking some risk to try to propel the economy forward, right? That's sort of the design is that
Okay.
you're taking this risk and you are reaping a benefit. You'll know if you're a W-2 employee, you don't get any write-offs like that. They're very
Right.
few and far between. Why? You're not taking any risk. You're an
Right.
employee. Your pay is guaranteed. You show up, you're going to get paid no matter what. And they're
Yeah.
almost all of the laws are pro employee. But for
Yeah.
employers, they're the ones taking the risk. So they're generally the ones who are going to reap the greatest rewards, the business owners. So
Okay.
there's just a lot of opportunity as a business owner to begin to take advantage of different elements of the tax code that are not available to you necessarily as strictly a W-2 employee.
Right. This is making a lot of sense. I feel like I'm asking probably like pretty basic level questions, but again, like nobody teaches you this stuff. And so I feel like I have no idea what to do. And I'm sure a lot of other early entrepreneurs come to you and they're like, I literally don't know anything about any of this.
Yeah, there's a really great book I would encourage all of your listeners to check out, and it's called Tax Free Wealth. It's written by a gentleman by the name of Tom Wheelwright. It's a great book. It is written in such a way that a layperson can understand it, and then there's like
Mhm.
light bulbs that go off where you're like, oh, that's what depreciation is. Oh, that's why I want to start a business. Oh, that's how I
Right.
build wealth without being taxed. It's a phenomenal sort of introduction to all the things that you are probably the most curious about as a business owner without being so technical. You're like, I, I'll be asleep in 2 minutes. You know what I mean? You'll
Yeah.
find it interesting because you're already sort of getting involved in those particular parts of business that you'll be fascinated by what you read. It's a great book. Tom is actually was, I don't know if he still is, but he was the CPA for Robert Kiyosaki.
Oh,
So that's sort of a funny story. Y'all should follow him. He's a pretty cool dude, but he bought a CPA practice, and Robert Kiyosaki was his client. And so Robert Kiyosaki really challenged him and ultimately changed the way he practices public accounting and became a tax advisor and sort of changed the trajectory of his life. So cool story, super cool guy, great book. Highly recommend it for anybody who is starting a business or thinking about starting a business.
yeah, I'll definitely have it linked down below. I feel like that's such a great, like, hot girl summer read to just be by the pool with your highlighter and your notebook, like taking notes, writing that down. Like that is the way, if you're a single girl and you're listening, like this is the way to stand out amongst the crowd. Like you're at the pool, everyone else is reading fantasy romance, including, usually me. But this year I'm going to be reading and taking notes about how to improve my financial understanding. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. I have a feeling you'll get a lot of attention in the pool for all the right reasons.
Exactly. Exactly. So the other thing I kind of wanted to talk about that you had brought up that I thought was really interesting was sort of differentiating between personal and entity. I think this also ties in well with what is like an ordinary and necessary expense, like understanding those key differences, especially as entrepreneurs, because so much of our lives is our business that it's sometimes difficult to make that distinction.
Yes, I think this is a great question. And it is sometimes a judgment call.
Mm,
But I will say this. One of the things you just have to remember is that your business is not you, right? Your business is not your personal piggy bank. It does not pay your rent, pay your mortgage, pay your car payment, pay all. I mean, like if it's not a business vehicle, all
right.
your personal stuff, like your dry cleaning and everything else. Like it really needs to be reserved for those business expenses.
Mm,
That's the way you have to be thinking about it. The way that I talk to my clients about this is like, I say, get a labeler. All right, get out that nice little labeler.
love a
And
labeler.
that's right. And on your personal card, write personal, like put the label in it. And then on the business card, business. And at the point at which you're buying something, you're asking yourself, is this personal or is this business?
Mm,
Okay. And when it gets blurry, you have to really kind of get real with yourself, right? Like,
yeah.
okay, I have deducted every one of my morning Starbucks for the
This,
last 7
yes.
days. Is this really
That
business? Like,
was exactly what I was going to ask. Is like, I'm thinking about someone who's an entrepreneur who's like my age and maybe is in a new city or like not even a new city, like working on their business from their computer. They go to a coffee shop to work for the day and they're like writing off or using their business card to pay for that coffee because they're like, oh, well, I'm going out to the coffee shop to work.
yeah, I think it's like one of those things where it's like if you've got zero income but $50,000 worth of Starbucks charges, like probably a red flag. You're going to have to exercise some judgment as a person. Like it really does require that. And here's the thing is that is it worth it to try to
Yeah.
write off every possible thing in your business and take that risk of potentially getting audited and have to go through that nightmare
Yeah.
when really, I mean, you're talking about, okay, for a Starbucks, okay, let's say it's $5. I know it's more expensive than that. Okay. And you get a deduction for half of that. So $2.50 deduction, and that you're going to save maybe, let's just say you're at 20% tax rate. Is it worth it?
Yeah. I feel like
So
I lean the tree back like so far to the other direction where I'm like nervous. I remember even when I started working, as an employee for another company and I had like travel expenses, every time I used the card, I was like, is this allowed? Like, is this okay? Like, am I allowed to pay for this because I'm on a travel expense? Like, I don't know. I think I'm just like overly cautious in that way.
yeah, probably a healthy thing. I'm not saying don't deduct the things that are really. I mean, if you meet
Yeah.
somebody every morning at 7:30, you have 7 days of networking where you're meeting people to grow your business. Okay, that's legit. You know what I mean? But if it really is more personal, like you just got to take a hard look at yourself and say, what is this really? So,
Yeah.
there are, when you talk about travel, like, okay, I'm going to, like, for example, my husband and I go to Colorado Springs. I was telling, we went last a couple weeks ago. And I told him, I said, next time we come here, he's got customers all over. And I said, next time we come here, we really need to make sure to visit a few of your customers in Colorado Springs so we can, one, legitimately write this off in your business. But two, we're also growing your business. And then three, let's show up and bring one of your customers, maybe like a surprise. We
Yeah.
show up and we bring a goodie bag and then we take a picture and we put it on social media, and it like turns into this something more than that, right? Like there are ways to justify these things but you have to document them. You have to map them out. And you really shouldn't abuse them. You really should be as judicious as possible.
Yeah,
So
I think that's a great call. Like, I think entrepreneurs are always thinking about that kind of stuff. I know I am. Every time I go to a new city, especially in this industry, like I meet people from all over the world, and anytime I happen to be in the same place as someone and I know that, I like reach out to them in advance and I'm like, "Hey, I'm going to be in your city on X, Y, and Z dates. I'd love to meet up for coffee." Like, if you have friends that you think would be a really great fit for the podcast, like bring them, let's all hang out and chat, and like maybe there's an opportunity for us to like connect and maybe like set up an interview with some of your friends or something like that. But
yeah,
I think it's
that,
always like, why not? I think, especially like maybe, I don't know. I think for entrepreneurs, personality types, like we're always thinking about that kind of stuff. And if you're an entrepreneur and you're listening and you're like, damn, that's a good idea. I never thought about that. Like, I don't know, maybe just me, but I'm always thinking of ways that I can like
yeah.
maximize as much as possible. And even if that means giving up an hour or two of like my quote unquote vacation to just do a little business. And I think it's so important to do that as you're growing and scaling. Like it's a little bit of a different story if you know, if your business is doing really well and you like legitimately need a vacation, then take the vacation. But,
Right.
you know,
Yeah. And if it's personal, it's personal. So, and
exactly.
there's ways to allocate these expenses, like, hey, this business was really 20%, work and 80% personal. Okay, we'll just write off
Mm,
20% of the expenses. Like, it
yeah.
doesn't have to be as like, well, that plane ticket, how am I supposed to take that $500 plane ticket and split it? Well, that's what accounting records do for you. That's what accounting systems do, is they allow you to account for those things differently. I would just say this: people keep good notes. Okay, I can't remember what I had for breakfast 3 days ago. There's no way in 3 years I'm going to remember what that particular trip was all about, why I went there, who I met with. Like, but if you make some notes in your accounting records and you scan
Mm,
stuff and you save it and you attach it in there, boom, all of a sudden you have created for yourself a little memory trail, right? For
yeah.
you to remember, like, oh, yeah, hey, I did do that, right? Or there, it could be a situation like, oh, okay, maybe somebody's looking at this, maybe I didn't do it right. And I just need to say, yeah, that part of that was personal. And I shouldn't have deducted the whole thing. So,
Yeah,
and that's
I
okay
think the
too.
lesson, no, totally. I think that's such an important lesson to learn is really like being organized and keeping a historical record of things. Like start Google Sheets, like start keeping track of everything. I think it's also smart to maybe put it in your calendar once a week that you update your expenses and you just like do that every single week so then you stay really on top of it. Because I think a lot of people get behind and then they're like, oh, I'll try to do it once a month, but that's pretty overwhelming. I think it's easier, like, same thing with cleaning your house. Like, you just do it once a week, and then that way you don't have to spend too much time doing it once a month because you have all these projects that have like piled up on itself. Just do it weekly, get it out of the way, set a time in your calendar. Like 15 minutes is probably really all you need. And it will make your life that much easier. Like, you're doing your future self a solid.
Oh my gosh, thank you. That's the exact way to think about it. And it is a discipline. It is just
Hmm.
like accounting is a discipline. It is literally a discipline. So you have to be disciplined about your discipline.
Yeah,
uh,
I'm all about that. Like, part of the reason why I started this podcast is because I wanted entrepreneurs to be able to set themselves up for success today so then they weren't having to like redo everything in the future. Because I think entrepreneurs are like, just so I don't care what it is, just as long as it's started, and we're just going to do whatever we can to get this thing off of the ground today. And even if it's a mess, like, but I'm like, no, no, you don't have to do it that way. Like, you could do it correctly the first time and starting with the intention that it will grow, and then making sure that all of your processes and systems around you are set up to scale at the same time. So you're not really having to like redo stuff
oh
and you're just
no.
focusing on what you need to focus on as the founder.
Yeah. Yeah. So I am along these same lines is that, again, accounting resources are becoming more and more offshored. There are
Mm,
ways to get a very, very inexpensive resource for the basic accounting stuff. So you don't even have to mess with it. Like, someone else can do it. And technology is your friend. Most of that stuff can even be automated. Some of the, bank feed transactions, like everything comes in and gets classified. Rules can be set up where that stuff just comes in. But I would say this, like, don't wait. Don't think, oh, I'll get to it. I'll get to it.
Yeah.
Everyone back burners their accounting. Everybody. Okay, the accountants back burner their own accounting.
Yeah, because it doesn't
Like,
sound like fun, but
right. It is, you're just never going to get to it because there will always be a
yeah,
new customer. There will always be a new sale. There will always be a new project. There will always be something else. And frankly, that stuff's just sexier. It's more fun. It's more exhilarating. It's why you started the business to begin with. You did not start the
right.
business to be like, oh, I want to spend my Saturday inputting bank transactions.
Yeah.
So,
What are your favorite
so
tools that you like to use that you would recommend?
QuickBooks Online is really the, I would say, probably the, it's not the most inexpensive, but it is the most widely accepted.
Mm,
Okay. And that is a big thing. Okay. So a lot of times I'll come across people who have started like Wave or some other weird program I've never heard of before. And then they're like, well, my accountant doesn't like this. And I'm like, well, yeah, because your accountant doesn't like these crappy programs. They want you to use like a decent program.
yeah,
So I would say, I mean, there's different versions of QuickBooks Online, but I would say just go get QuickBooks Online started. And you can upgrade as you need to, as you begin to like, I need to send customer invoices. I need to track
yeah,
my bills and pay my bills, and I need better reporting. But if you kind of start, it's the begin with the end in mind thing, like the whole Stephen Covey principle. If you start acting from the very beginning, like I have an accounting department and my accounting department runs like this, and this is how we do things here.
yeah.
You're a lot more likely to have that sophisticated mindset on accounting as your business becomes more successful. And
Hmm.
ultimately, that's the mindset you're going to need to become the CEO of that company is you're going to
Yep,
continue to elevate yourself mentally. So you need to start there,
I agree.
like so and I think QuickBooks is just it's just the thing to use. It's just like it's like I don't know, Bounty
I,
paper towel. You know what I mean? Like it's recognizable.
no,
Everybody's gonna know it.
truly. My mom has been telling me about QuickBooks since she was in business back when I was a little kid. And like, I feel like QuickBooks is the tried and true. It's been a legacy for a reason because it's functional, it works at scale, it's like integrated. I feel like it works with everything. Everyone uses it. So it's probably just like, don't, this is the one thing
Yeah,
that you really don't need to stray from and try something new. Just like go with the tried and true.
it's crazy because they actually so they one of the things that they did right with at Intuit was that it's open source code. So all these apps, whether it's Amazon or Gusto, almost every bank, every credit card, I mean, all sorts of other third party apps that you might be using for scheduling or invoicing, like HoneyBook, or they all integrate. So you
Yeah.
click a button and you map it all in there, and it just pushes the transactions right over, and they talk back and forth and magical things. I mean, Intuit has its own bookkeeping service, so which is really affordable. So if you've got super simple accounting, that I would probably just get them to do it because it's just they're working in there and it's just done. Payroll they've got in there. I mean, all sorts of different things. So I think the one thing that I would say about QuickBooks is I hate the chart of accounts.
Mm,
So I would say that along those same lines of beginning with the end in mind, really think about what kind of information you want in the on the back end from a reporting standpoint when you start talking about like what you want your profit and loss, your income statement to
interesting.
look like. What do you want that to tell you? How you set up the chart of accounts, which is like a listing of all the different accounts that you have to choose from to code something to in the accounting software, where everything gets coded and then ultimately aggregated and reported, then you kind of want to have that be yours.
Yeah.
So I say take the time. Do not take whatever QuickBooks just spits out because it will just literally vomit out a chart of accounts that's like in alphabetical order, and it's what they think you need to do. And you need to take the time to set it up to match your business so that you're tracking your revenue exactly the way you want to by the types
Mhm.
of categories. Same with cost of goods services, cost of goods sold and cost of services, and then all of your expenses. That's a really big deal to me. And then also number them, please. Number your chart of accounts. Like it helps a lot. It helps you to keep it straight, and it helps your accountant a ton. So the chart of accounts is often overlooked. Now, one thing I will tell people, okay, like I have seen some crazy general ledger accounts, okay? I, let me emphasize the word general. Okay. Your chart of accounts is not meant to be like Adobe, Microsoft. It's computer subscriptions. Okay. In when you code something into like computer subscriptions, then it's going to have
Yeah.
all the details of Adobe, Microsoft,
Hmm.
Canva, whatever, right? But you don't want to have separate accounts for each one of those vendors. That's a different
Okay,
avenue
that's
for
really
reporting.
helpful.
So general ledger means general.
Yeah. I feel like that's really helpful because I think I would make that mistake where I'm like, oh, well, I should write everything down. Like, I need to be super specific, but you just categorize them.
Yeah. And Google it. That's one thing that you can Google, like Google chart of accounts. We've got one on our website. Like find a resource that can give you something that, and then remember what makes sense for your business. Change it to match what makes sense to you, right? How you want to see your revenues and expenses categorized. You will be late years ahead of your counterparts. And might I also add, this is that pretty matters when it comes to accounting. When
Mm,
you give your financials to somebody and it's uppercase and lowercase and not capitalized and the numbers are all which ways and everything's not in the right, like,
it's not like standardized. Yeah.
it's not organized, right? All of a sudden, it doesn't matter if the numbers are correct or not. They are going to be immediately looked at
Yeah.
as like, well, I don't know, this might not be right because
No, that's
everything
such a good
else
point.
doesn't look right. Yeah, so
Yeah.
pretty matters. Okay, so
That's
everyone
such
can add that to their hot girl summer to-do list.
No, truly, I think that's such a good idea. I mean, thinking about it from the perspective of if you're trying to get an investor to invest in your company, and they obviously are going to want to see your financials aside from that which you've put in your pitch deck, and it's a hot mess, they're going to be like, ooh, looks good in the pitch deck, but on the back end, like shit is really disorganized and it's not cute. And that is such a red flag. And you don't want to give people unnecessary red flags when it's just something as simple as like, dotting your T's and crossing your I's, or did I say that? I said that backwards, but like, you know what I'm trying to say.
Yes, I know. So your maybe I should say this, like your financials need an aesthetic.
Yes, I
Okay.
love that.
Yes. So
Branding top to bottom, like even your
yeah.
back end should be aesthetic and branded, and like it is honestly reflective of it's not like it's telling the truth about your company whether you like it or not, and that needs to be reflective of who you are. And if you want to come across to the public as a company that's got their shit together, then you need to back that up. Like it's not just walk or talking the talk, you have to walk the walk and demonstrate that with your financials as well.
Yes. And I completely agree with you. Keep them updated. And not this whole like, oh, well, I only do it when I prepare my tax return or when I have to or when somebody asks for it.
That's
Like
so much.
it should be your decision making tool.
Yeah.
Like you could be looking at them every single month saying, how did I do? What business decisions did I make that were good for my business? Or where did I maybe spend too much? And along those same lines, the other thing that I recommend for everybody who starts a new business is make a budget. You
Mm.
are going to get sucked into all sorts of crazy LinkedIn messages where it's like, I can get you 700 leads for only $3,000. Like they're everywhere, right? I mean, you're
Yeah.
going to come across, and what you need to do is you need to look at your budget and clearly say, like, well, I've
Mm.
already spent my money on that for now. Like next year, I'll have more money for that. There is something about that discipline for entrepreneurs. Sometimes they think of it as like super restrictive, like they can't grow and they can't do things. But maybe what you do with your budget is you set up like okay, well, if I get to X number of sales, then it'll free up. I'll allow myself X more dollars in my marketing budget or my professional development budget or my travel, but whatever it is, right? Whatever it is where all entrepreneurs have that like guilty pleasure expense where it's like, oh my gosh, if I could be in another leadership class, like please sign me up. I want to do it.
Yeah.
So I would do that. That would be a really
Yeah.
big piece of advice for me.
This is honestly how I know that a key player for me in terms of my business is going to be like honestly, like I probably wouldn't even say like CFO. I would honestly be like a strategic financial advisor because they are so critical to helping your strategy. And frankly, I need accountability. I know for myself, personality wise, like I need added accountability when it comes to finance. I have never been good about that kind of stuff. So, like, personally speaking, I use apps to help me like send a flag when I'm starting to reach my budget for the month on X, Y, or Z spending because I don't personally like want to check my bank account every day. That's so stressful. So I would rather have somebody like send me a notification to be like, "Oh, you're close to your limit." And then that way monthly I'm like, "Okay, well I can't spend any more on this because I'm close to my limit." So like for
Yes.
business, I know I would need something similar whereas if I have someone that handles my finances that is like, okay, Maddie, you've spent X, Y, or Z this quarter. Like we're halfway through our sales budget. And if you projecting to do X, Y, or Z, you have to scale back in this way. Like they're genuinely like a strategic advisor. It's not just somebody to like monkey code in your dollar amounts that you've been spending and making every month. Like for me, thinking about it is it's this person is a key part of our team who is helping us make strategic decisions. Like, A, they should be aligned with your business before you hire them, like, right, like they should be interested in what you're doing, they should want to help with your mission, have the same values that you do, because then that's like they're not just some like random admin person, they're someone who's really on your team helping you with the same goals and trying to grow and scale and succeed in your mission. And they're doing that in their way, like you're doing it in only the way that you can as the founder, and they're doing that as the way that they can as sort of like your financial advisor.
Yeah. And you need that person, you need to choose a person who can tell you no. Like, you
Yeah,
don't want a
totally.
yes man in that position. You want the person who is like, no, and I told you no. And that means no.
Yes. Yes, that's so critical. Like in an interview, you're like, how comfortable are you with setting boundaries and holding people accountable?
Yes, yes, and then choose that person
Yeah.
because you want to make sure that that's the person is going to really be the straight talker. They're going to tell you when to stop because cash is short. We're not going to make payroll. This is the plan. I mean, they're thinking further into the future than you are on the stuff that pertains to those financial records. Because most of the time, founders, that's not what they're thinking about. They're not thinking about when are we going to run out of cash. they're
No,
they're not
totally.
they're not thinking about, oh, we have payroll taxes to pay. I mean, oh, we got to pay rent and stuff. I mean, I think
I
they
actually
in there a
love the
little
way
bit,
that
but
No, I actually love the way accountants and like tax advisors think because to me they're like dip ducking and dodging through loopholes. They're like aware of the boundaries, but are able to identify areas of opportunity where you can like sort of sneak in and like save money or work around certain things for the benefit of your business. And that is some like chess game level thinking that I am so obsessed with. I think it's so cool because like I just genuinely would love to have that kind of a skill, but it's just not where my mind works. And I just like have the utmost respect for it.
well, I think the thing is that magic really happens when you take all those perspectives and you put them together, right? You
Mm.
need all the people at the table voicing their opinion. And this is why, like, programs like EOS, Rockefeller Habits, any of these frameworks start to talk about building out a management team where you can have those types of candid conversations, right? And
Yeah.
you can be, I can't remember what book it was where it's like, I think it's Good to Great or something, where people be like arguing and then they're like friends. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
but that's the type of culture that they created where they are going to hash it out so that everybody's opinion is out there and stuff like that. And I think that becomes especially important when you're talking about money.
Yeah.
Money is one
Honestly,
of those
real
things.
friends,
It has to work that way, you know?
yeah. No, I was going to say, I mean, real friends are the ones who are going to tell you the truth, even when you don't want to hear it. And your management team should be the same. Like, for me as a founder, I think that picking the right team is probably the most important thing that I will do because I, I know, like, I didn't understand this for a really long time, but as the CEO and the founder, my role is mostly like orchestration. I am honestly, weirdly, I have like no skills other than the fact that somehow I'm able to see high level and I'm able to like orchestrate this weird set of different instruments to work really well together to like finish a goal. But really, like, I don't have any like technical skills that like a financial person does or a marketing person does or all of these different important team members do. So like from a founder's perspective, it's so important that I choose members of my team who are way smarter than me, who have no problems being super honest with me and can advise me because like I said, I actually have no idea. Like most entrepreneurs are not necessarily like a lot of entrepreneurs are not, experts in their industry. A lot of them are learning as they go. Most of us, I feel like, are learning as we go.
Well,
And so you need people around
totally.
you who can help you.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that a lot of times business owners forget too is that that payroll line item is big. It's a big line
Hmm.
item.
Yeah.
That's a big cost. And
Yeah.
so you need to make sure those people are firing on all the cylinders, right? Like,
Yeah.
are you getting your money's worth? If you're getting sucked back in to low level tasks on somebody that you hired to take care of that, something's wrong.
Totally.
And you're not getting what you paid for. And
Yeah.
it always needs to come back to me. It always comes back to money. You know what I mean? Like, because there's a million things that you could probably evaluate a person on, but at the end of the day, it's like, is this the best decision for this business?
Yeah.
Is the question, right? And I think a lot of times we get caught up, as people, we are human beings, right? We have a lot of emotions around these things. But the more and more you can create objective ways to measure performance, measure the utilization, the ROI on those dollars,
Hmm.
every dollar that you're spending, the better off you are as a business owner because you're taking away the things that are subjective.
Yep.
And your
Yep.
finance person is the person to help you do that. And that's the
Yeah.
person that you want helping you make good decisions. Should we terminate the employment? Should we get rid of that contractor? Should we end that marketing agreement? Should we do another paid ad? Whatever those questions are, it should always start first with a math problem.
Yeah. And it also gives you great, like, sort of you come armed, right? To say, if as a founder you have to fire somebody, you at least have the ability to explain why. Like, I know for me, I'm not great with confrontation. And I'm sure the first time that I have to let someone go, I'm going to be sweating profusely and so uncomfortable. But it's probably going to have to happen. And if it does happen, then at least I know that I'm armed with reasons why. Like, right, I'm sure, their manager is going to have a list of reasons where they weren't performing well. And then, I'll have my finance person on the back end being like, this is technically the amount in which they're costing. And like, does that, add up in terms of the level of output that they're giving in terms of your output financially? And I think already, like, I'm not even in a position right now. And I'm like, oh, I feel so much more comfortable about that. But it's truly like, I think finance is interestingly an exercise in boundaries, organization, and like having the personal strength and courage to make tough decisions, even if, in the best interest of the future of your business.
Absolutely. And ultimately, what will be your largest financial asset? So
Yeah.
you have to take care of it and grow it and nurture it and monitor it and manage it. And all of that begins with the accounting records.
Yeah.
It just does. I mean, if you go to sell your business one day, the first thing you will be asked for are your financial statements. They're not going to ask you, tell me about your vision. Tell me about your people. So just show me the money. I'm buying your business. I'm paying money. I want to know what I'm buying.
That's
Like
so real.
I know that it seems like for anybody who owns a business, I'm sure that's listening, they're like, wow, that's really harsh. But
Oh,
it
that's
is
the truth.
it's the truth. Yes, it's the truth. I mean, like you have to know your number one job as a business owner if you want to turn it into an asset that one day makes you a very wealthy person is that it needs to make money. And so keeping your eye on those finances is absolutely critical. You should almost be obsessed with making sure somebody else does it. Like keeps accounting records. Let me see it. I want to see it every month. I want it by the 10th
Yeah.
of the month. Just the discipline around it. You should be just hardcore about it.
And if you're not that person to be making them and to be inputting the values, then like really hire somebody else to do it because it's like it's just one of those things where if you've got a plant, like you got to frickin' water it. And if you're not going to water your plant, don't buy it. You have no business buying a plant.
That's amen. Thank you, Maddie. I really that it's kind of true. I mean, there's a lot of business owners just kind of like, I mean, they're not really serious. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
and I think there's like two different types of serious. Like, are you serious or are you serious? Like, you
truly.
gotta define that for yourself. And I say the people who are more focused on their finances, they're the ones that
Mm,
are serious. They're
yeah.
ready to make a difference. They know they have some, I don't know what it is in particular, but they are more determined to make it work because they understand what's happening with the money. They
Yeah,
get the,
you're right.
the correlation of it.
Yeah, because it's like everyone has a dream, everyone has a vision, but there's only a select few of people who are actually able to execute on that. And those who are able to execute on that are the ones who are like hyper aware of where the money is coming and going. And because honestly, you said it earlier and it changed my life when I heard somebody say that is it's like if your business is not generating money, you have a hobby. And
Yep.
that's like the harsh reality of the situation. And like you said, it might take a couple years, depending on what your business is. Like I think creators a lot of the time have this problem where it's like going to take a few years to ramp up because you have to generate an audience, as opposed to it's a lot easier to sell a product because you can jump on TikTok and make a couple great TikToks that sell out on TikTok Shop, like no problem. But it's the same at the end of the day. Like, do you have a hobby or do you have a business? And the only thing that differentiates that are the financials.
That's true. Amen to that. That's right. And you want to make money. Otherwise, you just keep the
Yeah.
cash in the CD and you can make 5.5% right now. I mean, like, that's a
Yeah.
much better return
Yeah.
with no risk.
Yeah.
So,
Like 100%. There are alternative means if you want to make a couple extra bucks outside of your 9 to 5 job, like they can reach out to you and ask you the best ways to do that. There's a whole bunch of other options as opposed to starting a business.
that's right. Exactly. Yes. Um, I think one of the things that we had, talked about before when we had met was like one of the things that I feel like business owners sometimes think about is like when they're starting to take off and they are, really kind of getting into like, I've got a million things to do is
Yeah.
what are the different accounting positions they need to be aware of? Okay. And I'm going
Oh
to tell
yeah.
you right now, this is like, I have seen some of these situations where it's like, hello, meet my CFO. And the CFO is really a bookkeeper. Okay.
Mm,
That's a problem. Okay.
mm,
So I want to give a little like mini lesson. Okay.
yeah.
So bookkeeper is going to be inputting transactions, reconciling accounts, and doing like inputting transactions, ARAP. That's pretty much what they do. They are basically data inputters. That does not mean that they are not valuable and that they are not thinking. They are. They're super important. Okay. But they have a limitation. They are not accountants, which means they are not going to be thinking about like adherence to GAAP. They're not going to be thinking about, oh, is this a tax issue? Is this something that I should be
Mm,
referring to maybe the external CPA or informing someone more knowledgeable about accounting? They're not going to be doing that. You really need that next level up. And that is typically in a smaller business, right? That's going to be, if you will, sort of like probably a contract controller, sort of like an assistant controller level person who has more sophisticated understanding about accounting, probably better at budgeting, forecasting, a little bit more at seeing into the future, can really
mm.
get those books closed and deliver to you solid financial reports. Okay, so
Yep.
it's kind of a two-tiered system. All right. Layered on top of that, controller slash sometimes into the CFO, right? Sometimes there's a bridge there between those two roles. The controller usually kind of is that person in a larger corporation anyway, who is ultimately responsible for the entire accounting function. Like that's their job. Like
Mm,
if it's wrong, their ass is on the line. The CFO sits in a spot where they're thinking more about the strategic direction of the company. Do we need
yep.
to raise money? Do we need a line of credit? Do we need to set up another entity? How is this working? Am I working with the external accountants? Do we need to get audited financials reviewed? What's the tax forecast look like? They're sitting at a much higher level. Okay, so A lot of times people think, oh, well, I'll bring in my friend and I'll right at the beginning and I'll call him the CFO, even though they're not a bookkeeper, right? Maybe they're a low level accountant or something like that. You are doing that person a terrible disservice. Okay. One, because they are not qualified. And as soon as they get into a
Mhm.
room and they say, I'm CFO, and somebody else who really is a CFO is a CFO, they are going to feel bad because they don't know what it means to be a
Yeah.
CFO. Okay. So that you don't want to put them in that position. That would be awful. You would be like, oh my gosh, I'm imposter syndrome now. Like you gave
Yeah,
it to
like
them.
just hire a bookkeeper, call it what it is, and then if the company grows and scales and you feel that that person can grow into a bigger position, then reward them thusly as your business grows. But like don't start them off as a CFO because you have two employees and you're like,
Right.
"Oh, well, you get in on the ground floor, so you get a fancy title."
Right. Exactly. Thank you. That's exactly happens all the time. Don't make that mistake. You're doing that person a disservice and you're giving them no room to grow, just like you said. So,
Yeah.
and if you're not sure, talk to somebody. Talk to a
Mhm.
recruiter, reach out to a friend of yours, talk to somebody else who owns a business. You know what I mean? Really understand what was the position that they were in last at their last company, right? A lot of times business owners don't know how to interview accountants. They're like, aren't they all the same? Well, won't a controller do everything that a controller does all the way down to the bookkeeper? If you've been in accounting for 20 years, the last thing you want to do is what the person on the bottom rung does. So
Yeah.
no, you're not going to get a controller at, 150K salary to do the lower level bookkeeping. They've been
Yeah.
progressed beyond that. So
Yeah.
there are just things like that sometimes business owners, they're like accountants. It's like general.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. They have different skill sets and they have different thresholds and levels. And so I would encourage your listeners to really think about that when they start to go hiring someone, especially when they bring someone
Yeah.
in internally. Do your homework. Check. Be careful on the title.
Yeah. I think this has been such a helpful conversation. There's so many things that we opened up about. And I think what I'm taking away from this is that, like, accounting really is its own world. And there's a whole list of language, roles, titles, like behaviors, important personality traits that's all required within that. And it is confirmed to me that, in fact, if I were to do this, that I am definitely going to hire somebody because that is not my strong suit. And it's great to have this information to arm myself with because now I know so much better.
Oh, well, thank you, Maddie. It was great to share, and I hope it was enlightening for your listeners
Yeah.
too. And always happy to be a resource for business owners. I believe in them. Small business is the backbone of the U.S. economy.
Mm-hmm.
So I applaud you for doing everything you can to support them too.
Oh, thank you.